Chapter 1. Introduction and the Cult of the Head. Start. Two divergent paths lead to the pinnacle of human achievement, though modern society overwhelmingly worships only one. Consider the story of a young boy bred for a singular purpose. Before he could even form words, his father guided his tiny hands around a miniature tool of his future trade. By the time he was a toddler, he was demonstrating his swing on national television, his childhood transformed into a masterclass of hyper-specialization. It was a relentless march of deliberate practice designed to conquer a specific domain. He was treated as a chosen figure, guided by a father who measured every variable to ensure an insurmountable head start over the rest of the world. This is the archetype of the modern prodigy, a narrative so deeply ingrained in our collective psyche that it has spawned entire industries of parenting manuals and early training academies, all preaching the gospel of an immediate, unyielding focus. Yet there is another story, equally triumphant but vastly different in its genesis. Another boy grew up dabbling in a dizzying array of athletic pursuits, skiing, wrestling, swimming, basketball, and more. His parents were profoundly uninvested in his specific athletic destiny. They gently nudged him away from taking any single endeavor too seriously. He played for the pure joy of it, discovering his own affinities through a broad sampling of physical challenges. When he finally focused his energies on a single arena as a teenager, his peers had long since been working with dedicated coaches and specialists. Despite this apparent delay and lack of early structured rigor, he blossomed into one of the most dominant and enduring figures in the history of his sport. These two trajectories represent a fundamental tension in how we understand success. The first relies on the assumption that a massive accumulation of highly specific technical hours is the sole mechanism for mastery. This belief insists that complexity demands specialization, pushing us to narrow our focus ever earlier in life. However, extensive research reveals a compelling counter-narrative. Across numerous disciplines, the most elite performers frequently undergo an extended, unstructured sampling period. They acquire a diverse portfolio of proficiencies, learn the contours of their own capabilities, and delay intense specialization until they have built a broad foundation. The winding path, it turns out, is far more common than the linear one, even if it is much less frequently celebrated by a culture obsessed with precocity. To understand why the broader path is so vital, one must understand the nature of the environments in which we operate. Some domains are inherently kind. In these realms, rules are rigid, boundaries are clear, and feedback is immediate and exquisitely accurate. You strike a ball and you instantly see where it lands. You move a piece on a board and the strategic consequence is laid bare. In kind environments, engaging in repetitive, deliberate practice is profoundly effective. The brain learns to recognize recurring patterns, grouping complex configurations into familiar chunks of information. This is why a grandmaster can memorize a complex board state in a mere glance, or why a prodigy trained from infancy can achieve terrifying proficiency. This precise phenomenon was famously demonstrated by an ambitious father who vowed to turn his children into world-renowned tactical masterminds. Through homeschooling and thousands of hours of intense repetitive drilling, he proved that an early start in a highly structured, rule-bound arena could reliably produce genius-level performance. The experiment was a resounding success, leading many to falsely conclude that this exact formula of unyielding early specialization could conquer any challenge, from curing diseases to unraveling the mysteries of the cosmos. But the vast majority of human existence does not unfold on a pristine court or a perfectly checkered board. Most of the world is wicked. In wicked domains, the rules are obscured, incomplete, or entirely absent. Patterns do not neatly repeat, and feedback is often delayed, ambiguous, or profoundly deceptive. In these environments, relying strictly on narrow, repetitive experience can be catastrophically counterproductive. A renowned physician might repeatedly misdiagnose a novel illness because they rely exclusively on the specific symptoms they have seen for decades, accidentally causing harm while feeling entirely secure in their expertise. Similarly, military evaluators might confidently predict leadership outcomes based on familiar training exercises, only to discover their experienced judgments are no better than random guessing when the context shifts. When the environment is wicked, deep experience often breeds unwarranted confidence rather than genuine skill. The danger of the modern age is that we are increasingly applying the solutions of kind domains to the problems of a wicked world. We silo ourselves into narrowing trenches of expertise, optimizing tiny fragments of a larger puzzle while remaining completely blind to the tragic consequences of the whole. This hyper-specialization creates fragile systems where professionals become so entrenched in their specific tools that they cannot adapt when the rules of the game subtly shift. As technology advances, machines will inevitably conquer all kind domains. Tactical calculation and pattern recognition are computational strengths, yet when the landscape opens up into a wicked, unstructured frontier, human adaptability reigns supreme. The greatest achievements now frequently belong to those who operate like a centaur, synthesizing broad, strategic vision to direct immense tactical machine power. It is no coincidence that the most revolutionary creators and thinkers, including those decorated with the highest scientific honors, are rarely narrow specialists. They are individuals who cultivate sprawling outside interests, effortlessly drawing analogies across disparate fields. They triumph not by staring relentlessly down a single, specialized tunnel, but by climbing out to survey the interconnected landscape. The modern world demands this flexibility, warning us that the cult of the head start is often a race to the wrong destination. Chapter 2. How the Wicked World Was Made. We find ourselves, boss, in an era fundamentally different from any that came before it, an era that has profoundly reshaped human cognition. To understand the demands of our modern environment, we must first look at how our ancestors processed the reality around them. In pre-modern societies, human thought was intrinsically bound to direct, practical experience. Individuals understood the world strictly through what they could touch, observe, and immediately utilize in their daily struggle for survival. If asked to categorize a series of objects, they would group them not by abstract concepts, but by their functional relationship to one another. Their intelligence was intensely practical, localized, and perfectly adapted to a world where tomorrow looked exactly like yesterday. However, as society modernized and moved away from agrarian survival toward complex, knowledge-based economies, a massive cognitive shift occurred. We began to view the world through scientific spectacles. Work and daily life increasingly required us to engage with systems, symbols, and abstract logic rather than physical labor alone. We learned to categorize things conceptually, to think hypothetically, and to navigate layers of abstraction. This shift represents a fundamental rewiring of how we solve problems, moving from relying entirely on direct, literal past experiences to applying broad, conceptual frameworks to novel situations. This evolution in thought is exactly what prepared humanity to survive in an increasingly wicked world. The modern landscape is characterized by its unpredictability, where the rules are constantly shifting and the feedback loops are notoriously unreliable. In such an environment, the rigid, practical thinking of the past becomes a liability. The ability to abstract, to take a lesson from one domain and apply it to a completely different context, is the defining cognitive skill of our time. It allows us to face unprecedented challenges and adapt to scenarios we have never personally encountered. Therefore, thriving in this new reality requires cognitive flexibility rather than rigid specialization. When we encounter problems that have no historical precedent, those who rely solely on narrow, repetitive experience often find themselves paralyzed. In contrast, those who have developed a broad conceptual toolkit can draw connections across seemingly unrelated fields, finding innovative solutions hidden in the spaces between disciplines. The wicked world does not reward those who simply master a single script. It rewards those who can rewrite the script as the play is happening. Chapter 3. When less of the same is more. There is a profound misconception, boss, regarding the architecture of elite talent, a belief that true mastery requires a relentless, narrow, and early focus on a single instrument or skill. Yet history offers a mesmerizing contradiction in the fog-draped canals of Renaissance Venice. The Ospedale della Pietà, an orphanage sheltering young girls, quietly became one of the most formidable musical institutions in all of Europe. Antonio Vivaldi himself composed masterpieces for these wards, and nobility from across the continent traveled just to hear them perform. Their secret did not lie in the modern obsession with hyper-specialization. These young musicians were not tethered to a single violin or flute from infancy. Instead, they were immersed in an environment of expansive musical exploration. They sang, they played stringed instruments, and they mastered wind and brass. They learned the architecture of music itself by moving seamlessly across different mediums. This broad sampling allowed them to understand the deep underlying structures of harmony and rhythm, rather than simply mastering the mechanical execution of one specific tool. By exploring many instruments, they developed a profound, generalized musical intelligence that surpassed those who had spent the same hours grinding away in a single, isolated silo. This phenomenon extends far beyond the Venetian canals. The world's greatest improvisers and most adaptable performers often possess a diverse background of varied experiences. They flirt with different forms before committing, building a sprawling cognitive foundation that allows them to draw connections invisible to the narrow specialist. This brings us to the very mechanics of how the human mind absorbs and retains complex information, revealing a devastating paradox in our modern educational systems. We are instinctively drawn to methods that yield immediate, visible results. When someone is taught a new concept and then repeatedly tested on that exact same concept in a concentrated block, a method known as blocked practice, their performance skyrockets. It looks to the observer and the learner alike as though rapid learning is occurring. However, this immediate proficiency is largely an illusion. It is short-term performance masquerading as long-term learning. The knowledge acquired so quickly is highly fragile, evaporating almost as soon as the practice session ends. True, durable learning demands the exact opposite condition. It requires friction, frustration, and delay. When practice is spaced out over time, and when different types of problems or skills are mixed together in what is called interleaved practice, the immediate performance plummets. The learner struggles. They make mistakes. They feel as though they are regressing. But this struggle is not a sign of failure. It is the very mechanism of deep cognitive encoding. By constantly forcing the brain to reconstruct a solution from scratch, rather than simply repeating a procedure fresh in short-term memory, interleaved practice forges permanent pathways. It teaches the mind not just how to execute a specific formula, but more importantly, how to identify which strategy to deploy when faced with an entirely novel problem. Consider the mathematics classroom. When students are presented with a new, complex problem without prior instruction, they almost universally fail to solve it. This productive failure feels deeply uncomfortable. Yet, when they are subsequently shown the solution, they understand the underlying architecture of the problem far more deeply than students who were simply handed the formula from the start. We are culturally conditioned to view hinting as helpful, to guide a struggling mind to the correct answer. But excessive hinting merely offloads the cognitive work from the learner to the instructor. It creates a seamless performance in the moment, but an empty vessel in the long run. True mastery requires the brain to navigate the labyrinth of confusion independently. The deliberate introduction of these desirable difficulties, spacing out practice sessions, mixing different types of challenges, and allowing for productive failure, builds a mental scaffolding that can withstand the unpredictable tremors of the wicked world. It transforms brittle, short-term knowledge into a flexible, enduring wisdom. To learn fast, we must be willing to learn slow, embracing the messy, inefficient reality that true comprehension is forged in the fires of temporary failure and enduring effort. Chapter 4. Thinking Outside Experience. The most profound leaps in human progress rarely originate from individuals toiling within the narrow, calcified boundaries of their own discipline. Instead, innovation frequently arrives from the margins, carried by those who have the audacity to think across the walls that keep other experts safely contained. Consider the case of Johannes Kepler, a figure whose intellectual journey defined the dawn of modern science. Kepler was not merely a practitioner of a single craft, he was a polymath who wandered freely between the worlds of theology, optics, and geometry. His eventual breakthrough in describing the elliptical orbits of planets did not come from staring through a telescope with the singular focus of an astronomer. It arrived because he was able to draw a radical, daring analogy from the behavior of light and the mathematical proportions of sacred geometry. He brought a toolset from a completely unrelated domain and applied it to the heavens, successfully seeing what those blinded by the traditional, established models had missed for centuries. This capacity to reach beyond one's personal experience is what defines the most effective problem solvers in our complex, wicked reality. It is a process of mapping concepts from one sphere of knowledge onto the challenges of another. While the hyper-specialist is obsessed with gathering more data within their existing paradigm, the visionary is often busy playing with unrelated ideas, looking for the bridge that connects the seemingly disconnected. This is not a matter of pure luck. It is a deliberate cognitive habit. It is the practice of maintaining a beginner's mind even after years of study, refusing to become so wedded to the familiar tools of one's trade that they become a pair of mental handcuffs. The scientific community, unfortunately, often punishes this very behavior. We live in a culture that rewards the rapid signaling of expertise, pushing researchers and professionals to narrow their focus early to gain credibility. Yet those who have managed to make the most monumental, transformative contributions, the Nobel laureates, the pioneers of new fields, are statistically more likely to have had a history of intense, wide-ranging extracurricular interests. They have the range to see that a solution in biology might be hidden in the physics of fluids, or that a breakthrough in organizational management might be found in the structures of jazz improvisation. When we rely strictly on what we have personally experienced, we are trapped in the prison of the past. We view every new problem as a variation of a struggle we have already survived. But the wicked world demands that we act as outsiders, even when we are standing in the center of our own professional lives. By intentionally cultivating broad, diverse inputs, reading outside our fields, talking to people in completely different industries, and embracing the discomfort of not being the smartest person in the room, we build a flexible conceptual architecture. We learn to identify the deeper structure of a problem rather than its superficial mask. The greatest innovators are not those who have seen the most in their own backyard. They are those who have spent their lives wandering through the backyards of others, collecting the scattered pieces of a larger truth. Chapter 5. The Trouble with Too Much Grit. The modern world has fallen in love with a single, seductive narrative: the power of grit. It is the story of the relentless pursuer, the individual who sets a singular goal in early childhood and sacrifices everything at the altar of that objective. We praise those who refuse to quit, who weather every storm with a stubborn, singular devotion. While tenacity is undeniably a virtue, our cultural fixation on this specific form of grit often acts as a blinder, obscuring the far more common and vital reality of personal growth, the courage to quit. The true trajectory of a meaningful life is not a straight line toward a predetermined destination. It is a process of constant re-evaluation. People are not fixed objects with static interests. We are works in progress, continuously discovering new facets of our potential through trial, error, and honest reflection. We possess a series of possible selves, hidden identities that can only be uncovered by stepping into new environments and testing ourselves against new challenges. When we feel the need to pivot, to abandon a path that no longer aligns with our developing reality, we are often shamed by the cult of grit, told that our transition is merely a lack of discipline. However, the most successful individuals, the ones who eventually reach the highest levels of achievement, are often those who are willing to flirt with their possible selves. They sample, they explore, and they detach when the evidence suggests it is time to move on. This is not the aimless drifting of the unmotivated. It is the strategic experimentation of the self-aware. By trying many things, we learn not just what we are capable of, but what actually animates our curiosity and deep-seated engagement. The danger of becoming too obsessed with gritting out a path that no longer fits is that we become prisoners of our own past decisions. We waste our most precious resource, time, stuck in a role that no longer serves our growth, simply because we fear the social stigma of being a quitter. In truth, quitting is often the most courageous act of learning. It is an acknowledgement that the data has changed and therefore the strategy must change as well. If we are to find the work that truly fits our unique composition of skills and interests, we must learn to treat our ambitions as hypotheses rather than contracts. We must give ourselves permission to leave the old self behind, recognizing that the most significant breakthroughs often happen after we have had the wisdom to walk away from a path that was not ours to finish. Chapter 6. Flirting with your possible selves. We are often sold a fantasy that our identity is a singular, pre-programmed destination waiting to be discovered, like a hidden treasure map buried within us. The advice we receive, echoing from our earliest days, is to find our passion and pursue it with unrelenting, linear focus. But this perspective fundamentally misunderstands the nature of human growth. Our interests and talents are not immutable traits. They are dynamic, ever-changing reactions to the environments we inhabit. We do not find ourselves. We create ourselves, iteration by testing our potential against the world. The most effective approach to life is not to commit early, but to flirt with the possibilities. This involves active, low-stakes experimentation. By sampling a wide array of activities, roles, and environments, we gather critical data about what resonates with our deepest curiosities. This is the antithesis of the grit-at-all-costs philosophy. It is a process of disciplined curiosity that honors the reality that we are complex, multifaceted beings. If you never step outside the walls of your current expertise, you remain trapped within the narrow confines of your past self. Consider the life stories of many great innovators and leaders. Their paths look like a series of erratic, disconnected zigs and zags when viewed from the start. They move from engineering to art, from science to philosophy, from the corporate world to the non-profit sector. To an observer obsessed with traditional grit, this looks like instability. In reality, it is a sophisticated form of personal research and development. They are not quitting because they are weak. They are pivoting because they have gained enough information to recognize that a particular path has reached its limit in terms of their growth. This mindset requires us to detach our sense of self-worth from the roles we currently inhabit. If we define ourselves solely by our job title or our specific skill set, any suggestion that we might need to change feels like a death sentence. But if we recognize our identity as a living, evolving project, then change becomes a sign of health rather than failure. The possible self, the version of you that might be more fulfilled, more challenged, or more impactful in a completely different arena, can only be reached if you give yourself the permission to release the identity you have outgrown. By remaining open to the unexpected, by allowing your interests to lead you into unfamiliar territories, you are not drifting. You are building the range necessary to navigate a future that no one, not even the most dedicated specialist, can accurately predict. Chapter 7. The Outsider Advantage. There is a recurring pattern in the history of breakthrough innovation, one that consistently defies the conventional wisdom of the professional hierarchy. When a field becomes stagnant, trapped within its own rigid methodologies and insulated from external influence, the necessary revolution often arrives from an outsider, someone who does not belong to the inner circle, someone who brings a completely foreign set of tools and a different way of seeing the world. This is not because the outsiders are inherently more intelligent. It is because they are not yet blinded by the dogma that has become invisible to the experts. They have the outsider advantage. When a problem is framed in the language of a specific discipline, the solutions are inevitably constrained by that discipline's conventions. An economist, a biologist, and an artist will each look at the same complex system and perceive an entirely different set of variables. When we combine these perspectives, we see the true shape of the challenge. This is why some of the most successful problem-solving teams are not those comprised of identical experts with perfectly overlapping resumes, but those that deliberately include individuals with wildly different backgrounds. The friction created by these clashing perspectives, the lateral thinking that emerges when one person's familiar tool is applied to another person's impossible problem, is the engine of genuine creativity. Consider the development of technologies that seemed to hit a dead end, only to be revived when someone repurposed them for a completely different function. This requires a form of lateral thinking with withered technology, the ability to recognize that an old, seemingly obsolete solution is actually the missing piece for a new, burgeoning field. This kind of vision is rarely found in the narrow specialist who is busy optimizing the current system. It is found in the wanderer, the generalist who keeps a wide library of seemingly useless information in their mind, waiting for the moment when those disparate dots can be connected into a new picture. The challenge, boss, is that our institutions, our universities, our research labs, our corporations are built to incentivize the opposite. We reward the signal of intense, early focus. We discourage the interdisciplinary work that looks like dabbling, but by doing so, we are effectively pruning the very branches from which the next big breakthroughs will grow. To recapture the outsider advantage, we must intentionally design our lives and our teams to invite the unexpected. We must be willing to be a novice in a new field, even after we have become a master in our own. We must recognize that the most significant answers to our hardest questions are often hiding in the spaces we haven't yet bothered to explore. Chapter 8. Fooled by Expertise. We naturally place our trust in those who speak with the unwavering cadence of authority. When we are sick, we turn to the specialist. When we face a complex strategic decision, we seek out the consultant who has spent decades in the trenches. We assume that the depth of their experience directly correlates with the accuracy of their predictions. But in the wicked, high-stakes domains that characterize our modern world, this assumption is often a dangerous illusion. Experience, especially when gained within the confined walls of a single domain, can lead to a hardening of the mind, a state where we become so entrenched in our established patterns that we lose the ability to see when the rules have fundamentally changed. Studies of professional forecasters have revealed a sobering truth. Those who are most loudly touted as experts, those who provide the most definitive and narrow predictions on television or in boardroom presentations, are often the least accurate when the environment is volatile. They fall prey to the hedgehog trap, knowing one big, singular thing and attempting to force every reality into that narrow frame. Because they have spent their careers building a reputation on a specific perspective, they are psychologically and professionally incentivized to double down when their models fail, rather than admitting the limitations of their expertise. The individuals who actually demonstrate superior predictive capability in complex environments are those who operate more like foxes. They are not tied to a single, elegant theory or a rigid methodology. Instead, they embrace a pluralistic approach, gathering information from a dizzying array of disparate sources, constantly weighing competing possibilities, and, most importantly, willingly updating their views when the evidence demands it. They have the humility to recognize that their expertise is inherently limited, and that the world is far more chaotic than their models can ever capture. The danger of expertise is not the knowledge itself, but the false sense of security it provides. When we stop questioning our own assumptions, we become fragile. We stop noticing the subtle signals that indicate our traditional methods are no longer effective. This is particularly prevalent in fields like medicine or finance, where the feedback is often delayed or obscured by noise. An expert might achieve a series of successes through sheer luck, or within a kind environment, but that success can blind them to the reality that their specific tools are inappropriate for a changing, wicked landscape. To avoid being fooled by expertise, we must cultivate a healthy skepticism toward our own certainty. We must treat our professional knowledge as a living, breathing tool that needs constant maintenance and re-evaluation rather than a fixed truth that exempts us from the need to remain curious and open. Chapter 9. Learning to drop your familiar tools. The most dangerous moment in the life of a professional is often the moment they believe they have fully mastered their domain. We build our identities around our toolkits, the specific methods, theories, and habits that have brought us success in the past. But when the environment shifts, when the wicked reality of the world presents a problem that our tools were never designed to solve, we face a critical test. Do we cling to our familiar comforting instruments, or do we have the courage to drop them and learn something entirely new? There is a tragic, recurring theme in the history of institutional failures, from forest fire disasters to organizational collapses, the refusal to abandon the tools that once worked. In the heat of an emergency, when the situation is fluid and the old rules are clearly failing, individuals often double down on their established training. They do this because the familiar feels like safety. To drop the tool, to admit that what you know is no longer relevant, is to step into a void of uncertainty. It is an act of profound vulnerability, yet it is exactly this vulnerability that allows for survival and renewal. This is the essence of deliberate amateurs, those who intentionally maintain a distance from the established norms of their own industry. By keeping a portion of their professional focus outside of their primary discipline, they prevent themselves from becoming completely captured by the consensus of their peers. They remain capable of looking at a crisis with fresh eyes, asking what-if questions that the long-term specialist has stopped considering. The greatest challenge of our time is not the acquisition of knowledge, it is the capacity for unlearning. As the world accelerates and technologies render old paradigms obsolete, our ability to pivot, to discard the mental scaffolding that has become a cage, is our greatest competitive advantage. This requires a detachment from the prestige of our past accomplishments. It demands that we view our expertise not as a fixed monument to our success, but as a set of temporary hypotheses that must be constantly tested against the changing world. When we can hold our tools lightly, ready to let them go the moment they stop serving the truth, we liberate ourselves to engage with the reality of the present. We become agile, resilient, and ready for whatever the next shift in the landscape may bring. Chapter 10. Expanding Your Range. We arrive at the conclusion of this exploration, boss, not as a finished destination, but as a point of departure. Throughout this journey, we have confronted the persistent, pervasive myth that the only path to mastery is a narrow, early, and unwavering focus. We have seen how this cult of the head start fails in the wicked, unpredictable environments that define the modern age. We have examined the evidence demonstrating that a diverse, sprawling foundation, what we call range, is the true engine of long-term adaptability and profound innovation. The essential lesson is not that specialization is inherently bad. In the kind domains of repetitive, rule-bound tasks, specialized focus is a powerful, necessary tool. The problem arises when we treat every arena of life as if it were a game of chess or a repetitive athletic drill. When we apply the logic of the closed system to the open, interconnected, and constantly shifting landscape of the real world, we become brittle. We become so focused on the optimization of our tiny individual parts that we lose sight of the health and potential of the whole. Expanding your range is not about aimlessly drifting from one interest to another. It is a deliberate, disciplined practice of maintaining curiosity across boundaries. It is about valuing the long game, giving yourself the time to sample, to fail, to pivot, and to integrate insights from disparate domains. It is about being a generalist who recognizes that the most powerful solutions often exist in the spaces between established fields, waiting for someone with the breadth of vision to connect them. As you move forward, consider your own life as an ongoing experiment. Do not be afraid to be a beginner. Do not be intimidated by the pressure to have a perfectly linear career narrative. Embrace the value of the winding path. Look for the connections that others are too narrow to see. Cultivate a diverse portfolio of interests, not because you need them to be useful in the immediate sense, but because they are the raw materials of your future insight. The world does not need more specialists who are afraid to look beyond their own trench. It needs more people with the range to navigate the complexity of our collective future. The journey of range is the journey of staying forever curious, forever learning, and forever ready to adapt to whatever the unknown holds next.